Welcome to another episode of Sports Talk for You. We have not had a show in a very long time due to being busy and just not having the time to do it. But we welcome you all in. I have my co-host Armand Ely, Adam Parker with me. And today is a special day as we want to welcome in a well-known college basketball analyst, and especially here in the Wichita area with the Wichita State Shockers. We want to welcome in Rich Hollenberg. Hello, Rich.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, hopefully this works out okay. Wi-Fi be damned.
Yeah. Well, Rich, we just want to get your opinion. How are you, college analysts, major league analysts handling this COVID stuff, because I know you report with the Tampa Bay Rays, and how are you guys handling this, not being able to, communicate and do all that stuff?
Well, I mean, communication, to be honest with you, has been okay. Doing a lot of what we're doing right now. A lot of Zoom calls. The Rays have just opened up their training camp, just like the other 29 major league teams. Fortunately for me, it's right in my backyard in St. Petersburg. Tropicana Field is. Unfortunately, because of the circumstances, I can't be there. So you do a lot of Zoom calls with Kevin Cash, the manager, and select players. But now, at least fortunately, we're in what I consider countdown mode. We're under 3 weeks until Major League Baseball is supposed to start. And I just keep knocking wood every time I say that and every time that conversation comes up, because I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I'll feel a lot better once opening day comes and goes and we start getting some games under our belts and start getting used to what this new reality is going to be.
Yeah. Now, have any Tampa Bay players, have any of them reported positive or not?
No, not yet. As a matter of fact, reporters being who they are, they're constantly asking those questions and digging. And from what I was told, there were a total of 6 players who weren't in Tropicana Field the last few days. One of them, Chaz Rowe, a relief pitcher, just showed up today, so that means the number is 5. The teams are not beholden to revealing those names for any reason, mostly due to HIPAA circumstances. But the Rays have been kind of mum on that topic as of now. So it would only be conjecture at this point to say that those 5 players who we haven't seen on the field, taking ground balls, taking BP, whatever it is, that they have coronavirus. I can't say that by any stretch. But so far, there haven't been any positive results from the Tampa Bay Rays.
Hey, Rich, how confident are you that we will see a Major League Baseball season?
First of all, love that shirt that you're wearing. Got to get myself a Wichita Smokies shirt. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
And my confidence level, honestly, if I'm being completely honest with you, I'm at 50%. And the only reason I say that, I don't want to sound like a stick in the mud. I don't want to sound like I'm being pessimistic, but there's new news every day, and all that needs to happen is one of these teams or a couple of these teams to all of a sudden come out with a statement that 10 or 15 of the players have tested positive. You don't know how the league is going to react at this point. I don't think it's going to be similar to TBT, which is going on right now, where is if some players end up with coronavirus, then that team is just out of the tournament and you move forward. I don't know what happens if that is the reality. So I'm what I consider to be cautiously optimistic. I think Major League Baseball is certainly doing everything in their power to make it as safe and as viable for everyone involved. And certainly we're all looking forward to seeing live sports on television. And if baseball can pull this off, I think it would be a tremendous beacon of light and of hope for all the other sports teams and all the other sports leagues to kind of get things going again, as we know NBA is just about ready to start sooner than later as well.
Hey, Rich, I got a question for you. Do you think the delay in baseball is more to the coronavirus or the commissioner slash owners not seeing eye to eye with the players?
That's a really good question, and one that I'm certainly not smart enough to answer, to be honest with you. I think it was a very bad look for Major League, any way you slice it. But there are a lot of players who I know personally and who I've communicated with personally. And once you speak to them man to man and understand their belief and their thinking, you get a little bit of a different view. I haven't spoken to any owners, let alone Stu Sternberg, who owns the Tampa Bay Rays, who is a tremendous guy by all accounts. I haven't had the opportunity to speak with anybody on the owner's side to get their point of view, but this is, at the end of the day, a business. And when you have a union, you're going to be pitted against from one side against the other, no matter what the sport or the situation is. And unfortunately, with this much money at stake, I think it was clear that both sides saw fit to go to the proverbial wall in this situation as much as they did, because it didn't seem like either team, in my opinion, was negotiating in good faith. It seemed like this was going to be the end result at some point. So if it was, then I'm with you. Why not start 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier? But with that said, I don't know that you probably could have pulled it off 2 or 3 weeks earlier, because look at what's going on in Florida right now, let alone some of the other states where all of a sudden Florida is now a hot spot. If the Rays were reporting to camp and if Major League Baseball was reporting to summer camp right when those numbers were coming out, all of a sudden maybe Major League Baseball would have felt like they had to walk it all back and pull teams out, and then restarting becomes even harder than the initial 2.0 that we're in right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be hard to tell what's going to happen, and maybe it will be a succession and maybe it'll just be a failure. It's time will tell, I guess. So, all right, let's get to college basketball.
Actually, Aaron, I got one more baseball question for him. Do you think Manfred is going to be a long-term commissioner? I mean, in my opinion, I think he botched the Astros cheating scandal, as well as kind of botched some of this stuff, during the coronavirus. Do you think he'll be a long-term commissioner?
That I think remains to be seen, because I think the outcome of what we're going to see play out in front of all of our eyes, for the most part, in the next 2 years is going to be critical. And legacy is important. These guys might not admit it, but legacy is important for a commissioner just as it is for a player or a manager or what have you. And if there is no redeeming what a lot of people are saying right now, especially based on what just happened during this shortened season between the players and the owners, if we're heading towards a work stoppage after the 2021 season and the collective bargaining agreement can't be agreed upon before then, and then there's a strike after this nightmare that we're just going through now, I think that could be one of the intended or unintended consequences for Major League Baseball. Is they're going to have to find themselves a new commissioner, either by their own deeming or because Rob Manfred just throws up his hands and says maybe I'm just not the right guy, or I don't want to deal with this anymore on my watch. Either that, or we could take an optimistic view of it and say maybe Rob Manfred really kind of rolls his sleeves up and says, I'm not going to let this happen a second time, even though the first time was in unique circumstances concerning this summer. I'm not going to let this happen again for a quote-unquote real regular season like we're going to be heading towards when the collective bargaining agreement is done. I think Rob Manfred's a good man. I just think at this point in the game, with a lot of the black eyes that have been dealt to Major League Baseball, he's going to be the punching bag, so to speak. And that's what you are when you are at the top of the food chain. Even if you're the CEO of a business, a good CEO will not blame the people who work under him. He'll take the blame himself, and he'll work as hard as he can to rectify that situation. Rob Manfred has yet to do that. I don't think he has to do that at this point, but another year or so down the road, he might have to face that music.
Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah, because the fact that he came out 3 weeks ago saying 100% there's going to be baseball, and then a day later he goes, well, there might not be baseball. It's like you can't just get fans' hopes up like that and then just tear it right down. If you don't think there's going to be baseball, just come out and say it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, let's get to some college basketball. Of course, Wichita State, I believe, came out a couple weeks ago and said that, if there is a season, fans will most likely have to wear masks in the stadiums. Do you think, and I know there was talk too, I saw on the internet a couple days ago about maybe college basketball starting in January and just playing conference games. Do you think that would be a great idea, or do you think that college basketball should just start up regular?
Well, listen, if I had my druthers, obviously like you guys, I would start it up right now if I could. The one thing, with tongue firmly planted in cheek when I say this, the one thing Wichita State fans and their team will never have to worry about is masks or no masks. You'll be able to hear the fans inside Coke Arena. I know that for a fact. But listen, I think before college basketball is, front and center, I think we got to deal with college football first and determine what the go-forward strategy is going to be for college football. And I think that will set the tone for what happens in college basketball. I know I've been reading similar things to you that you have on the college football front, where they've said maybe they skip any kind of non-conference games, which, let's face it, especially for the Power 5 conferences, those are more likely than not, what you would call cupcake games anyway, or sometimes they're bye games. And a lot of times that's similar. A lot of college basketball blue blood programs take a lot of heat for scheduling those games also. They're bye games for those smaller schools. They get paid a significant amount of money. So the harm would be done more to those schools than it would to the bigger schools. And I include Wichita State in that. They certainly don't have to pay anybody to go play them. So I think college football is going to have a lot to say in what ultimately happens schedule-wise and otherwise with college basketball.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. What do you make of the FBI scandal in college basketball? And do you think Sean Miller is going to be in big-time trouble? Because I'm an Arizona fan, and there are things where I think he's guilty, but then at the same time, I think he's somewhat innocent in it. What's your take on the whole thing?
Well, I've only met Sean a couple of times, being relegated to the East Coast where I live and calling the games that I do. I rarely get Pac-12 games, but I was with Sean this past season when they came to Baylor and played Baylor in Waco. And obviously at that point, everything was kind of out in the open, and he knows what's going on, just like we knew what's going on. It was clear that there was going to be no discussion about that whatsoever. I think all of these coaches have been advised to declare their innocence until they are proven guilty. And I think you can make that statement about any of the coaches who are under investigation. My honest take on this is, and I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing anything that was done illegally or incorrectly or unethically, but it's one of those situations where it's hard for me to judge when you have a fair assumption that most schools are doing similar things. And it's just a question of who's getting caught and who's going to be have their feet held to the fire, who's got maybe a bigger spotlight on them than other schools who do, which schools have the ability and the budget to do what they're doing from boosters. A lot of times, I hate to say this, but a lot of times it would be a fairly understandable assumption. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, that it's not necessarily the coaches who are out and out doing the illegal things. It's more from the booster side of things. And it's more from, the tree underneath that coach. Now, listen, you have the punishments in place because the NCAA realizes that. So they use the terminology, that a head coach has to be able to oversee the entire program. And I guess in some instances that would include the boosters, who have sometimes way too much access to the players and to the coaching staff than they should be allowed. But as it relates to Sean Miller specifically, I don't know anything differently from what Sean has been accused of or what that program has been accused of as I do Kansas and NC State and Auburn and any of the other schools who have been or were under or still are under NCAA FBI investigation. I just think it's terrible, and I think it's another thing that hopefully it ushers in a new era of reform in college sports, not just college basketball, but maybe we need to rethink how we police ourselves as a sport instead of forcing the hand of a federal bureau of investigation to come in and do this. I would have to think that the FBI has much more important things on their plate than deciding the fate of a college basketball program.
So do you think that the programs that got in trouble at the end of the day, they'll just kind of, in essence, get a slap on the wrist and then new rules will be in place? Do you think something along those lines, or do you think it'd be a little more harsher than that?
Well, I think if you asked Mike Boynton at Oklahoma State, I think he thinks their punishment was extraordinarily harsh. And I'm a guy who covers the Big 12. This will be my 5th straight year covering the Big 12. And Mike Boynton is salt of the earth, guys. There is nobody I would send my son to play college basketball for ahead of a guy like Mike Boynton. He is a tremendous individual. I hold that entire staff in extremely high regard. And I can't speak for Lamont Evans. I don't know Lamont Evans. But they are now being punished for something that the FBI said Lamont Evans, among others, committed. I personally, do I think that's unfair? Yeah, I do. And that's why I think they are trying to take steps to have that 1-year postseason ban lifted, because there are some 18 to 22-year-old young men who have done absolutely nothing wrong, but they're going to be asked to bear the brunt of this wrongdoing in their short tenure of college basketball. Sometimes in Cade Cunningham's situation, it's going to be 1 season. We know that. And kudos to him for sticking with the program. But a lot of these kids are 4-year guys. Even the walk-ons, the student managers. I mean, this is the pinnacle of their athletic career, and they're suffering for someone else's wrongdoing. So I think the severity of the punishments certainly are in the eyes of the beholder. And I think if you ask a school like Oklahoma State, they certainly feel like they've been mistreated to the harshest extent, and would love nothing more than to see that punishment that they were handed down, remanded to something a little less stringent.
Yeah.
Rich, once and if we get the college basketball season, we're in Wichita State country up down here. What are your prospects with Gregg Marshall's new recruits coming in? I know we did lose a lot, but what are your prospects for Wichita State for the coming season?
Well, as you guys know, I know Gregg, and I've covered that Wichita State team probably more than any other program I've covered in my 10-plus years calling basketball games at ESPN. And if there's one thing I know, it's that Gregg doesn't recruit bad kids. He recruits the right kids for his program. Now, are some kids knuckleheads? Yeah. I mean, I was a knucklehead when I was that age. If we're living in glass houses, far be it for us as the media to throw stones at these young kids who are trying to do right by themselves and have people, chirping in their ears, trying to do right by them. Sometimes, as a young man in that situation, you trust the wrong voices that you hold close to you. But with that said, I think what happened with Gregg was a little of an avalanche type of a situation where one or two dominoes fell, and then all of a sudden the foundation got a little bit shaky. No one is better equipped to right that ship faster than Gregg Marshall will right that ship. I don't think this is a downturn in the Wichita State program at all, because there is a way to play basketball for Gregg Marshall. And as long as he finds the right kids to play that brand of basketball, then they will find ways to win basketball games on the court. When I first started covering them years ago, it was not pretty basketball, and they wore the black hat, and Gregg Marshall embraced that, and the team embraced that. Those were the years when they were in the Valley just like Creighton was. And that rivalry was, in my humble opinion, it was very much good guy versus bad guy. Creighton.
We lost Rich.
And go down that list. You got me?
Yep, I got you back. You're good.
Okay. But Creighton was definitely, the good guy, and Wichita State was the bad guy. And part of that was personality driven. Part of that was style of play driven. Then Creighton left for the Big East. And all of a sudden, Wichita State went on those magical runs with Fred VanVleet and Ron Baker and Evan Wessel, and the list goes on and on and on. And now all of a sudden they became more darlings of college basketball, and teams and coaches and players aspired to be like Wichita State. I think Gregg Marshall has solidified that with the culture of his program, and I think that culture will win out over any number of players who are deciding that Wichita State isn't the right place for them. Because I will say this, and again, this is not anything personal against any of the kids who decided to leave that program. If you go into Wichita State and that is not the place for you, you're going to find that out pretty quickly. And it's better for you and the program to get your butt out of there and find another school who wants you to play basketball for them, because you're not going to be successful at Wichita State as a player, and you're not going to help the team be successful as a program.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say this because I'm biased, but when Wichita State was going on their losing streak, it was there towards the middle of the season in conference play, and Gregg Marshall had that practice where he made the guys run, and he asked them, what's on your minds, and they wouldn't say, so he just kept making them run. And then finally senior Jamie Echenike stepped up and told him what was wrong, and then all the other guys came out, and then guys were collaborating, blaming each other. I think that practice turned that team around late in the season. Do you think, and I'm not saying this because, again, I'm biased and it's Gregg Marshall and Wichita State, but do you think any other coach in college basketball could have done what Gregg Marshall did there and to get his team turned around and ready to go for postseason?
Yeah, that's tough to say because Gregg's a great coach, but there are so many great coaches who I've come into contact with and gotten to know through the years. I think Gregg has a directness to him that maybe in this day and age especially, a lot of coaches feel like they have to back off of and can't really embrace, even if it's who they are at their core. And I'm not saying Roy Williams is different because I don't know how Roy handled this past season inside the walls of the North Carolina program, but they were miserable last year, if you remember. And they really didn't turn it around the way that Wichita State did. And the only reason I point that out is I know that contrary to Gregg, Roy has very much that Southern gentleman, aw shucks type of a personality. But on the court, he is as much of an SOB as Gregg Marshall is. And it reminds me of one of the games I called from Wichita State this past year. They were playing VCU. And I remember being at practice and thinking, my gosh, do I feel bad for Jamie Eshenique, because he is the whipping boy for Gregg Marshall, and he doesn't deserve it. He's just, Gregg's picking on him right now. And I consider Gregg a friend, and I would say that to his face. But then I realized there's always a method to Gregg Marshall's madness, if you will. And Jamie was one of the key factors, not only in the story that you just told, but in that team turning it around and playing better as the. And so, again, I think that if you have 100% buy-in at Wichita State and you can accept the tough love that you are going to get from Gregg Marshall, then he'll find a way to make you succeed. Even if he has to drag you across the finish line, he'll find a way. And that's how champions are built. That's how trust is built within a program. A lot of these kids didn't see it that way, and those kids are gone, to be honest with you. And I think Gregg saw the writing on the wall well before anything became official with any number of those young men. But now I believe him when he said, and he said it publicly in different articles and in different interviews, he's glad that things happened the way they did, because now he can move forward with the guys that he knows he needs to be successful at Wichita State.
Yeah. Because Tyson Etienne came out and made a statement saying, I belong here at Wichita State. I'm staying. This is my family. And Gregg Marshall recruited me. So, he's one guy that we know will stay and that believes in Gregg Marshall to coach him.
Yeah.
What do you think about Dexter Dennis? Will he be coming back? I haven't heard that much about him since he, declared for the NBA draft, which I think he's going to stay. What are your thoughts on that, Rich?
I missed who did you ask me about? I'm sorry.
Dexter Dennis.
Oh, yeah. Dexter's an interesting guy. I remember, again, going back to that VCU game, that was in December, and that happened to be right at the time, if you guys recall, where all of a sudden Dexter kind of pulled an AWOL and was a disappearing act. And this is also something, I don't want to betray any confidences here, but I will say there is an element that every college basketball fan has to be open-eyed to, and that is that a lot of times coaches not only have to coach the player, but they have to coach the parent as well. And in a lot of situations, there are people who I alluded to earlier as well, who have the ear, or sometimes both ears, of a particular player, and that is in direct contrast to what the coaches say. And when could you imagine how difficult that must be? Especially if you're from a one-parent household and you have that one parent who you trust more than anything in your life telling you something that might be at odds with this coach that you've entrusted your basketball life and your basketball career to. A lot of times I've spoken to numerous coaches who have, upon leaving our conversation, they're like, yeah, I got so-and-so's parent upstairs. I got to go, deal with them. I have to go talk to them. I have to go, right the ship with them. That was one of those situations. I think Dexter's a guy who, first of all, he's a sweetheart of a kid. I know a lot of the players felt very strongly personally about Dexter, but I think in this day and age, with the ability that he has and the people that may or may not have been talking and advising Dexter, I hate to say it, but why not say I'm going to test the NBA waters and see what I can get? Now, do I think he's ready to be a pro? No, I don't. I'm just going to be flat out honest with you. I don't think he's shown that he is. I'm not an NBA scout. I've never been really that good at evaluating talent in the moment. But what I do think is he has set himself up to make a tough decision, because now having to make a decision between coming out, pulling your name back out of the draft, and then deciding, oh, wait, I might want to switch schools too. Now you're really kind of handicapping or handcuffing your own career. You're shooting yourself in the foot, to be quite honest with you. And I don't know what happened in the aftermath of that situation where Daxter missed that game that we were talking about earlier around the time that they played VCU. But I do know that if it's in his heart to be a Wichita State Shocker, and if he has learned from this past season's experience, then I think Gregg would open his arms and welcome him back, because sometimes there's no better example than a kid who has made some mistakes and learned from those mistakes than a kid who hasn't made any egregious errors in the first place and doesn't have any frame of reference on how to right those wrongs.
Yeah. One last question. It's a fun question to close it up. I want you to give your insight on your favorite Wichita State team you have announced and your favorite game you have announced in Wichita State.
Oh man, it's almost impossible for me to pick any other team than that undefeated team, the team that went 18-0 in conference. I feel like I grew up as a college basketball announcer as Fred and Ron and Evan and those guys grew up as basketball players. I remember seeing Fred and having Gregg and his coaching staff tell me, like, this kid's a winner. Like, this kid was not heavily recruited, but I want him on my side of a battle. I want him on the floor. He makes the right decisions. He's as hard-nosed as anybody. And you could say the same things that about him as you can about Ron and about Evan. That team, their senior year was my favorite team. And not only that, but to be able to call the game where they closed out the regular season, it was against Missouri State on their home floor, just to be a part of that and to soak that in was tremendously memorable. And I'm going to show you guys something. I feel bad because I know we're on a Zoom call and no one is going to be able to see this. But I save all of my boards, all of my college basketball boards. And this is kind of going back on it a little bit because I'm sitting here telling you that year was my favorite team, and that game, the Missouri State game where they finished the regular season undefeated, was my favorite game. Well, here's the board that I saved, and I had Gregg sign it for me. This is when Cleanthony was a senior and Fred and Ron were sophomores. I'm just looking at this, remembering some of the names you forget. Chad Lufiel was on that. Takale Cotton, of course, was a junior on that team. Darius Carter. I mean, this was a team that, like, was 12 strong and just a bunch of role players. Cleanthony early was really, really good. But this was that team that, Gregg wrote to Rich, great having you along for the ride. And that was the undefeated season. And it was just magical. Final fours and stuff I'll never get to call them unless I end up going to CBS Sports or Turner Sports. But that was as close to that type of feeling as I had, knowing that I was watching and witnessing, and so fortunate for me that I got to be part of the soundtrack of that game and that season for those guys and for those Shocker fans who I hold so close to my heart. That was definitely something that I'll take with me the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, Rich, we appreciate your time. I mean, again, Shocker Nation, we miss you calling our games year after year after year, and it's just been a blessing that we've had two commentators like you and Mark Adams that love Shocker Nation, love coming to Wichita, and, of course, Mark with his Doodah Diner. We know how he is with that. But appreciate your time, taking time out of your day to join us, and hope you stay safe and stay healthy there in St. Petersburg, and let's just hope there's baseball here in the next 20 days.
Yeah, you guys as well. Everybody stay safe, be smart, and I'm glad you mentioned the Doodah Diner. Everybody who is in earshot of this interview, get your ass to the Doodah Diner. Not only because it's the best food, my favorite diner in the entire country, and I've been all over the country, but places like that need you right now. They need you more than anything. So support your local businesses. and the Doodah Diner, the good folks over there, Timmery and Patrick are like family to me. So I miss them, and every chance I get back, even if I'm going to Manhattan, Kansas, or Lawrence, Kansas, I'll find an excuse to drive through Wichita just to see those guys.
All right. Thanks, Rich. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich.
Take care, fellas. Be good.
All right, you good.
Thank you.
All right. That's going to do it for our show today. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We will have more shows in the future. Next show, we will probably bring up the Patrick Mahomes contract extension that he got. So stay tuned for that. We will see you guys next time.